this lecture knowing two things. The first thing you will know is how to construct a well-warranted argument. So an argument with multiple warrants. The second thing you will know is how to write an argument where you preempt common responses to your opponent. So that means where you anticipate what your opponent is going to say and why your argument still stands.
In other words, you should be viewing your argument not as something which exists purely in the speech in which it is constructed, but rather an argument that you know will exist and an argument that you know will matter in the later speeches.
So we're teaching you how to make strategic arguments that when you read them in your speeches, even if your opponent makes responses, are going to continue to push you through to the end of the debate and help you win the round. So the first goal is what we're going to focus on for the first part of the lecture. It is constructing a well-warranted argument, or an argument with multiple warrants. Tyler, what is one reason why we would want to construct an argument with multiple warrants?
Well, the first reason is that it's more persuasive and allows you to make a more complete plan. All right? So, here's an example. Suppose Joan just received 2 skydiving tickets. Now, I happen to be terrified of heights. I don't like heights of any sort. They scare me. It's my worst fear. So, suppose Joan wanted to convince me to go skydiving with her, because all her other friends are gone. I'm her last resort. She says, Tyler, come skydiving with me. I'm not going to want to do that, right? But suppose she gives me one really, really good reason. Can someone give me a really good reason to go skydiving? It would be simple.
She'll buy you food afterwards.
She'll buy me a good dinner afterwards or something like that. Yeah.
YOLO.
You only live once. So, right. So suppose she gives me one really good argument, right? Am I going to be convinced?
No.
Yes.
Would depend.
Just one.
Depends.
Suppose there's only one really good argument. I may be convinced, right? If it's super, super good, right? But chances are, the only way in which I can be convinced is if someone gives me multiple reasons for why that's the case, right? Does that make sense to everyone?
Yes.
So, one reason why you want to have multiple reasons for an argument is because it sounds persuasive. But that leads into the even more important thing for a debate round. Not only does it sound good to your judge, it sounds like you really know what you're talking about and you have lots of reasons why, but it's going to serve a strategic function in the debate round. So let's come up with an example of something that I feel very passionate about, okay? I think that Justin Bieber is an awful singer.
Thank you.
Right? Right?
Oh,
Justin Bieber is an awful singer.
I know.
Okay. Justin is a bad singer.
Just whisper.
Tell me then, why are you keeping it
Hey, so can you tell us a reason? You seem, hey, yeah. Why is he a bad singer?
Because he has a girl's voice and he's a boy. It doesn't make sense to me.
Ooh.
That's a good reason.
Let's come up with a different reason.
Let's come up with a different reason.
Oh, so I can't say it sounds like the Hannah Montana or something.
Well, you could say that, but you'd have to say Hannah Montana is also a bad singer. So that's our first reason. He sounds like other bad singers.
Okay. So you know if someone's a bad singer if they sound like other bad singers. And Justin Bieber sounds like other bad singers. So. Who can give us another reason why Justin Bieber is a bad singer?
Yeah.
His songs
His song's what?
are bad.
Songs are bad.
Well, so what is an indication of if he's a bad singer? Abina?
His lyrics have like no value or substance, I guess.
Okay?
Okay.
Empty lyrics.
We're all about stories.
So I'm going to add another reason up here. I'm going to say that Justin Bieber is a bad singer because nobody goes to his concerts.
Oh.
Okay? So no one goes to his concerts.
Actually, it's
So how many reasons listed on the board? How many warrants for our argument do we have as to why Justin Bieber is a bad singer? Is everything okay, Michael?
Yeah, no.
Like what?
Was Justin Bieber over there?
Oh, there's a bug on my leg.
Okay. Is it gone?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
That was quite a reaction. Alright, so everyone, we have 3 reasons why Justin Bieber is a bad singer, right? So we want to have 2 additional reasons why strategically it is good that we have diversified our responses.
So why is it smart for us to say more than one reason that Justin Bieber is a bad singer?
And it can't be persuasive, because it's persuasive, right? We want strategy. Yeah.
Because if one of the justification falls, you still have 2 more to.
Right. So one of the justification falls, then we still have 2 more. So it's kind of true that a lot of people go to Justin Bieber's concerts, right? Like some of them are sold out. My sister was going to get tickets for $100. It was ridiculous, right? But can Justin Bieber still be a bad singer because he has empty lyrics and because he sounds like other bad singers?
Yeah.
Right. So taking out one of these reasons why Justin Bieber is a bad singer doesn't mean that you have defeated the argument that Justin Bieber is a bad singer.
Now let's think about when your opponent is approaching this argument. What do you think, what sort of problems do you think might arise when they attempt to answer this argument?
Like problems for them to answer it?
Yeah, specifically because there are 3 different warrants.
They have to disprove all of them.
Okay, so that's sort of the first one, right? The first thing we talked about, sort of similar, right? If one of them is not true, the claim that he's a bad singer is still true, right? So can someone help us out with a different response? Someone new raise their hand. Come on. You, right here. Did that air apostle, sure.
Both questions?
So the first reason we've isolated that it would be strategic to have multiple warrants is that if any of them are true, then the claim is true. Now we want to elaborate why that might make responding to the argument why having multiple justifications might make responding to the argument a little bit more difficult for your opponent. What do they have to do?
You have to argue all of them?
Right. So given that the first part is true, that if any of them are true, and the claim is true, how does that transition well into the second? Right?
So repeat what you just said again, Senior.
You have to argue all of them.
They have to argue against all of them, right? So in a debate round, if you have a claim and then 1 warrant, you have to spend time answering 1 warrant. In a debate round, if you have a claim and 3 warrants, and you want to make sure you take out the claim, then you have to spend time answering all of the warrants, right?
Because otherwise, this is still true. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So can someone raise their hand and repeat back to us why it is more strategic to have 3 warrants than 1 warrant?
Someone over
In
here.
terms of a debate round.
Yeah.
Ashley.
If one justification falls, then you have other reasons, and they have to argue all of your warrants.
Okay, good. So we're going to add a little bit of nuance to this. There are some warrants that are easier to answer than other ones. So I'm going to modify this example we have on the board. What if I say that Justin Bieber sounds like, who is an example of another bad singer? Hannah Montana?
Yes.
What? Give me the name of another bad singer.
Justin Bieber.
Lil Wayne.
Little Wayne.
Any rapper who doesn't actually sing.
Hey, Obina, bass
Alright,
guy.
so
I'm a musician, so I feel quite passionate.
Sounds like Kesha.
Hey, don't talk crap about Lil Wayne.
The Beatles.
Okay, Justin Bieber is a bad singer because he sounds like Hannah Montana and he sounds like Kesha, right?
That just sucks.
Now, what is the same about these 2 arguments? Or what is the difference between these 2 arguments and this argument down here about no one going to his concerts? Yep.
The difference, like, the one just says that he's a bad singer, and then because he's a bad singer, no one goes to his concerts. Or, yeah.
So this bottom one down here says that no one goes to his concerts. But what do these two arguments both rely upon? Both of these arguments rely on something. They have something in common.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so do you want to try it again? What do they both rely upon?
That he's a bad singer, or that.
Well, so that's what we're trying to prove, that he's a bad singer, right? We're asking, what about the way in which they approach proving he's a bad singer is similar? Yeah.
Both of them rely on the opinion, like an opinion, as in like I may think Hannah Montana is a good singer, while you think she's a bad singer.
Right, so they both rely on this understanding of who other bad singers are, right? So they share something in common. So this is an example of an argument that is deep. These are examples of arguments that are dependent on each other, right? The criterion we're both using is something along the lines of, singers that, well, we want to elaborate on that a little bit. So singers that don't have meaning to their lyrics are bad singers, right?
Well,
Right. So all of these rely on the fact, for whatever reason, that Justin Bieber is a bad singer because of something about his lyrics, right? So if your opponent can take out the fact that lyrics don't matter when we're evaluating who a singer is, maybe what matters is whether they're entertaining. Maybe what matters is how many CDs sell. Then they've taken out all three of these arguments, right? Because there's a premise in these arguments that we evaluate singing based on the content of the lyrics that all of these arguments have in common. So is it easier or harder to answer multiple warrants if some of the warrants are dependent on each other? Can someone raise their hand and tell me? Yeah.
Easier.
Why is it easier?
Because when you, like, if they just take out the common, like, what they're dependent on, then both arguments fall.
Right. So if there's a point of commonality, and that's what your opponent attacks, then it's easier for them to take it out. Because they don't have to answer everyone individually, they just have to answer the point of commonality. So what type of, if you're going to have multiple justifications for constructing a well-warranted argument, what kind of warrants do you want to have? And then tie that, please.
Diverse warrants.
Diverse warrants. What is the argument? What is the word we used earlier to indicate diverse warrants?
Dependent on each other.
That are not dependent. So you want to have independent arguments. So you want to have multiple arguments, multiple independent arguments.
so one of you two sitting right here on the very end, explain which arguments are independent of each other and why. Which warrants, I should say, sorry.
The lyrics being empty, that would be an independent argument, and that no one goes to an argument. So, I think it's concert. Or, I mean, did I say argument? Concerts, my bad.
So why are these arguments independent of each other?
Because they don't rely on one, like, sole reason.
So what is the criteria for judging singing based on this justification?
The criteria was having, like, bad lyrics, wasn't it?
So how do we know? Yeah. So how do we know if someone's a singer, a good singer or a bad singer, based on this justification? What is it appealing to?
Their lyrics, whether they're good or bad.
Right. The content of the words in their song. What about this one? How do we know if someone is a good or a bad singer?
Whether people go to the concerts or not.
Right. So the criteria that they're or the standard that they're using to evaluate whether or not they're a good or bad singer is different in these two. So the premise is different, which means the arguments are independent. Great. So now we've given you an example about Justin Bieber, but you probably won't be using this on this about Justin Bieber on this topic. So we're going to give you an example about how you can make independent justifications for a criterion. So part of this interactive lecture is a flowing drill. So everyone should take out something to flow with.
What is this?
Look at your schedule. You saw me struggling.
Yeah, they have to be adopted by the whole pack.
I remember once I went off speaker and they were telling me 10
Does everyone have something to flow with? So here's the thing. At the end of this, 3 justifications for a criterion that I'm going to read. I'm going to ask you to repeat them. And it's going to be interactive, okay? Which means that you really have to know because I'm going to call on you and you're going to have to stand up in front of the class and repeat them. Which means everyone needs to pay attention. Yep?
It's just a criteria.
Right, so the criterion that you're going to flow, the justifications for the criterion are consistency with self-defense, the value is morality. So these are justifications as to why there is a link between the value of morality and the criterion of consistency with self-defense. And I'm going to give you 3 justifications. So does everybody have the value of morality and the criterion of consistency with self-defense written down? Okay, ready? The first justification for my criterion of consistency with self-defense is that any moral theory is premised upon some worth of humans. Wallerstein explains why we have to therefore ensure the right to self-defense. Self-defense must be an absolute right, because without a right to self-defense, the right not to be killed can hardly be regarded as a right, as it provides its owner no effective tools to protect it. All persons must be able to defend themselves, since if they were forced to allow their worth to be subjugated through physical or psychological means, they devalue the sanctity of human worth, which destroys the basis of any moral system. The second justification for my criterion of consistency with self-defense is the government, which is the enforcer of morality, has a monopoly on violence in order to better protect individuals' fundamental rights. We give up our right to kill in order for the government to protect our right not to be killed. However, at the point where the state cannot complete its duty to protect our right to live, the social contract is broken and citizens have the right to use violence to protect themselves. The third justification for my criterion of consistency with self-defense is that physical security is a prerequisite to theorizing about moral truths, as well as the enjoyment of one's normative duty. Being dead or severely injured precludes me from being given any moral consideration. Thus, all persons are due an absolute right to self-defense against physical violence, since violence precludes morality being done to them. Okay. Now we're going to go over these 3 justifications.
Can anyone, Chris, tell me what the first one is?
Is it any, I forgot this word. It's sort of more theory of based upon humans. To get all of it.
Okay,
So what was the first part of it that you said?
based upon humans, right?
Yeah, based upon human. Based upon human.
So the thing I read before the card said something about humans. What does someone else have written down? Obina?
Any moral theories, or has a premise of human value?
Yeah, human value or human worth. So that's the first step in the argument. What comes next?
Wallerstein.
Do you want to? I'm sorry.
Someone said it.
So the Wallerstein card comes next.
Yeah.
Who wants, Tyler's gonna call on someone who raises their hand to describe what Wallerstein says.
Strike, blue shirt, yeah.
Wallerstein says that we must issue the right to self-defense, or it's going to devalue human worth.
Okay. And can someone tell us what is missing whenever the right to self-defense goes away? What else is lost besides human worth? Or along with human worth, I should say. Yeah.
All moral ethic is lost when human worth isn't upheld, because moral ethics are premised on human value. Or premised upon human value.
Okay, but Wallerstein says something very specific. Wallerstein is talking about rights. What rights is Wallerstein talking about?
You had your hand up. Come on. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not completely sure, but without the right to self-defense, we have no tools for protection, something like that.
Tools for protection is close. Wallerstein uses a very particular right. He talks about the right to what?
The right not to be killed is
Right.
disregarded.
And someone phrased that positively. The right not to be killed.
The right to life.
Right, the right to life is the exact rhetoric of the card. So you're correct.
So does someone want to summarize what we have so far about what we've written so far in terms of the first justification for the criteria?
So someone put the argument together. Raise your hands, come on. I'm going to start calling on you randomly. Raise your hands. So you, right there.
Yes.
Huh?
Repeat the question, please.
So my question is, we've just sort of broken it down. We had to sort of piece it out together at first to understand what the argument was saying.
Yes.
So put it together.
Okay, so Wallerstein was saying that we have the right to self-defense, and then we need to ensure it or it will devalue human worth, and that if this social contract is broken, we have the right to protect ourselves.
So that has to do with the second argument. We're not quite there yet.
The social contract part, that is. Okay?
Yes.
So
The social contract has to do with the second argument.
So someone tell him what right goes missing whenever the right to self-defense. So what right also goes away whenever the right to self-defense is lost? Yeah, right here.
Oh, right goes away?
Yeah.
Whenever self-defense is lost?
Yes.
The right to life?
Right. So someone put it all together.
The self-defense is an absolute right, and without the right to self-defense, then the right to life is taken away as well.
So that's the second part of it. I'm going to put it all together for us. The first is that the premise is that morality depends on human worth. The Wallerstein card says that without self-defense, the right to not be killed is meaningless. We have to be able to have a way to ensure our right to life. So if we care about human worth, people should have the right not to be killed. Therefore, they have to have the right to self-defense. So the premise of the argument is that morality cares about human worth. If we care about human worth, people should be able to live. That means that people should be able to protect themselves. Therefore, morality is linked to the right to self-defense. So let's go over the second justification.
So someone was hinting at it earlier. Yeah.
The government is the enforcer of morality, and when we as a society give up the right to kill, we also give up the right not to be killed. And when the social contract is broken, we receive the right to kill.
So you said the state is the enforcer of morality. I'd like to clarify a little bit. What specific power does the state have that this argument says should not be given to individuals?
Monopoly on violence.
Monopoly on violence, right? So what does that mean? That sounds like something cool. What is that?
Like control over violence.
Control over violence, right? So what does that mean in terms of what individuals can do?
The ability to take away rights.
The ability to take away rights. Could be part of it, I suppose. Anyone else want to add on to that? Yeah.
Was it the right to kill? Or like the ability to kill?
Yeah. So, if the government has control over over the enforcement of violence, what does that mean for individuals?
They don't have the right?
Hmm?
They don't have the right?
Right, they don't have that right.
But if an individual is being attacked and the state is not protecting them, what right does an individual regain since the social contract has been broken? Shane.
The right to like use deadly force in the form of self-defense.
Right.
Well, yeah.
Do you want to clarify, Tyler?
Well, so we don't want to. We don't necessarily want to talk about deadly force yet.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. So we just isolated the two parts of the argument. Someone put it together. So we just isolated, first of all, that the state has a monopoly on violence, and one of you clarified that that means the state has the right to like kill, control. Yeah. So the state is the one who does like the death penalty. The state is the one who controls all forms of violence, and individuals do not have that right. However, what would give individuals that right? Yeah. Right.
When another individual, when they violate the social contract, then that they now have the right to kill.
Right, so when the social contract is violated, that's the first part. But specifically when the state fails to do what?
Protect the person being violated.
Right. So the only reason that we grant this monopoly to the state is because we want the state to protect us, right? And so say we say we agree, we won't protect ourselves, the state can do it for us, we give up our right to punish people and to use violence, right? But if the state fails to do so, we take that right back. Because otherwise we wouldn't have surrendered that right in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who doesn't think it makes sense? No one's going to raise their hand.
Well, so to clarify, who can tell us what the difference is between the first argument and the second argument?
We're sort of getting the same hands over here.
We are.
Let's go with you in the blue. Someone got
Henry. Me.
Yeah.
The first one talks about I can't read my notes.
Feel free to look up at the board to remind yourself. Don't read off the board.
Okay, I don't know because I can't read my notes.
Can someone help Henry? Yeah, in the black shirt right there.
The first one says that self-defense is like always a right that you always have, and the second one says that self-defense is only a right you have once the social contract is broken.
Right. So who is the actor in the second justification? Who is the one that is in charge of the social contract?
The state.
The government, right? So the first of these appeals to a justification of morality that has something to do with an inherent right not to be killed, right? That individuals have for themselves. The reason why the second justification is different is because it appeals to the role of the government and the obligations and the relationship between the government and the individual.
All right, so Chris, can you tell us the difference
No.
that Joan just elaborated?
Okay.
Okay, so can you tell us what the first and the second said? And then maybe we can find the difference. Okay, so the first one is making a claim, a general claim about worth, right? So you're right there. And the second?
That the government was morality.
Right, or not really morality, but what? What specifically? What type of action?
Self-defense.
Right, so the government provides the right to self-defense, which specifically means protection from being killed, from violence, right? So there's the difference. Does everyone understand?
So the way that these two arguments are different is the first uses a condition of morality, which is about human worth. From the condition of human worth, it says if we care about people having worth, then we care about them being alive. And from that, it derives that if you care about people being alive, you have to be able to defend yourself in order for your right to life to have meaning. So it's appealing to a notion of worth that's grounded in individuals, and from that deriving the right to self-defense. The second one doesn't start with the notion of worth. It starts with the idea of the role of the government, right? So it's not it's not a justification based on the individual and a condition that they have. It's a justification based on the role of the government in society. It says that governments have a monopoly on violence. In order to have that monopoly on violence, it's because individuals give up the right to protect themselves so that the government will give them rights through the social contract. But if the social contract has been broken, if an individual is being attacked, then they have the right to self-defense.
So, before we move on, someone tell us why this standard, as it is justified, might be more strategic than a standard that simply has one sole justification. Yeah.
Because if your opponent somehow disproves the first justification, you can still extend the second justification because they're independent of each other.
Cool. Can someone say what he said again? Because it's really important for the round. Can you tell me what he said?
That both justifications are independent and they don't come in each other. So if you were to do one round, one of them would still stand.
So if your opponent said for some reason that morality isn't linked to people having work, you could still say that your second justification stands because that's not dependent on the assumption that morality is based on human worth, and that could still reinforce the link between your value and your criterion.
Cool. So we want to move on?
Yep.
All right, great. So now we're doing an example of this on the contention level, right?
Yep.
Great. All right, so we just covered the framework, and a similar thought process applies to the contention.
So there are two things you should listen for when I read this. The first is multiple reasons why my claim that I'm about to use, which is that self-defense, that deadly force is an act of self-defense in cases of repeated domestic violence. So you want to listen to the reason why deadly force is an act of self-defense. And you want to think about how this argument is going to be strategically used in the round to preempt what most people will say to arguments about using deadly force as a rule for self-defense.
And the contention was that deadly force is acting in self-defense.
Yeah, so the tagline for this contention is that the use of deadly force is an act of self-defense. The use of deadly force is an act of self-defense in cases of repeated domestic violence. First, abuse escalates in unpredictable cycles. Death is always a threat in the cycle of abuse. Johnson explains, assuming that women battery cannot be severe is especially problematic as women who tend to call the police only after a number of violent encounters and women battery often escalates. Between the cycles of abuse, it is unclear when the next attack will be so severe as to kill the victim. The phases in between bouts of violence become shorter in duration and the attacks become more severe. It is increasingly likely that the abuse becomes fatal. This argument says that domestic violence continues to become more severe and that the victim never knows when the abuser will kill them. Thus, they must use self-defense at any time to protect themselves. The second justification for why deadly force is an act of self-defense is even victims who are not immediately being physically attacked suffer harm proportional to death. Many suffer psychological harm that is equivalent to death. Ewing writes, though these women may not be faced with the choice of killing or being killed, many are confronted with a dilemma nearly as dreadful. Unable to recognize any viable means of escape from the battery, they face the choice of killing their batterers or being reduced to a psychological state in which their continued existence will have little, if any, meaning. The result is a life hardly worth living. The only reason life is worthwhile is that the person finds value in it. Constant psychological harm destroys that reason. Deadly force is justified since psychological trauma and fear is just as bad as death, so the victim must kill the abuser. So there were two different arguments as to why self-defense through use of deadly force in cases of repeated domestic violence is an act of self-defense. Who can give me the first one? Do you want to call someone?
For the first justification on why the use of deadly force is an act of self-defense, it talks about how the abuse escalates for every cycle of abuse, and in the Johnson card it talks about why there's a threat of death that increases every time the battery occurs. So at any given time the victim might be killed.
Mm-hmm.
So deadly force is appropriate because of that.
Yeah, so you said a couple of different things. So let's tease them out as I write them on the board. The first argument, can you guys read that? I know the pen kind of bled through. Okay, I'll write a little bit, and if you can't read it, I'll switch to a different part of the page. So the first argument, what did you say at the first part?
The abuse escalates every cycle of abuse.
Right, so repeated domestic violence will continue to escalate. And what does the card say? What will it continue to escalate until?
It will continue to escalate and the risk of death will increase until the victim is killed.
Risk of death increase until victim is killed. Maria said that there was a second part of the argument that was really important. What was the second part of the argument that was really important? Yep.
The victim never
Sam?
knows when the domestic violence could end up being fatal.
Right, so the victim doesn't know when the violence will be fatal. Do you want to call people for the second one? Sure.
So on the second. What was the second one? Yeah.
Victims suffer from harms that are equivalent to death.
Okay. And who's the author making this argument? Ewing, right? Good. So why is it proportional to death? Someone different. Someone over here. Yeah. You know anything?
In the register?
Yeah. Why is what victims go through proportional to death?
Because psychological harm makes them live in, endless tension.
Yeah, something along those lines, right? It says that the psychological effects leave them in a state in which their existence is very, very different.
And in the rhetoric of Ewing's card says something along the lines of the psychological state is equivalent of that to death. At the very end of the card, it says they're being reduced to a psychological state in which their continued existence will have little in any meaning. The result is a life hardly worth living. So the rhetoric in the card itself reduces the psychological state of a victim who has suffered repeated domestic violence as one where they are essentially dead.
And what does Ewing think is the only solution to avoid this problem?
Kill the abuser.
Kill the abuser. Great. I don't have time.
So what is the difference between the first argument about domestic violence and the second argument about domestic violence and how it prompts the victim to use self-defense, deadly force as a form of self-defense? Yep.
The first one talks about how domestic violence will always escalate. So before it escalates to the point of death, the victim should kill the abuser.
Mhm.
The second one talks about how the abuse alters the psychological state of mind of the victim, so it's a life worse than death. So the human worth is worse, and then that's what should kill the abuser. So it's proportional to kill the abuser.
Right. So the second argument is about the psychological state of the victim. What is the first argument about? Aman?
The physical harm that the victim, receives from the abuser.
Right. So it's about the physical harm. So there are two different warrants for the claim of why victims have to use deadly force. One is that it is they have to use deadly force because they are physically going to be destroyed. They are physically going to be dead if they don't use deadly force, and that could happen at any time that their abuser could kill them. The second argument is that they have to use deadly force because they have been so psychologically damaged it's the equivalent of them being dead.
So, suppose a negative, sort of transitioning into the second goal of the lecture. Suppose a negative makes the argument that in order for actions or punishment, I suppose, to be proportional, to be moral, they must be proportional.
So how many of you have heard the argument that self-defense has to be proportional? Are any of you running that on your negative case? Can someone make, Jared, you seemed excited. Can someone make the argument for us about why self-defense has to be proportional?
Alright. Okay, so Reed defines reciprocity as a violent response is reciprocal in severity to the aggression it is intended to prevent. So that tells us that the only action that can be taken is a proportional action, the action that the abuser is giving to the abused.
Can you restate in your own words the first part of what you said?
The violent response is reciprocal in the severity of the action the aggressor has put upon the abused.
Okay, so that tells us that proportionality is an important consideration in self-defense. Can someone give an argument as to why proportionality is an important consideration for self-defense? Yep, Abina.
The harms that the victims suffer are equivalent to death, so it is being reciprocal because the abuser is done.
So that would be a response to an argument that says that killing the abuser is not proportional. The question I have now is, why is it true that proportionality is an important consideration in terms of self-defense?
Because proportionality achieves morality, and then you would justify that in your case somehow.
Okay, so why is it true that proportionality achieves morality, or is it an important component of self-defense?
It's an important component of self-defense.
Okay, so if you're running this argument, you would need a reason why. Some people, for example, would say that the difference between harming someone and defending someone is that you will respond in a way that causes the least amount of harm for them. So if Tyler comes up to me and he flicks me, is it okay if I kill him? Of course. Of course. Well, assume we care about Tyler. Even if he doesn't go skydiving.
Just for a minute.
Right.
I mean, I can kill Jared then, because he was flicking me a lot.
So I think we would consider that Kyle killing Jared is not an act of self-defense if Jared is flicking him, right? So a lot of negatives would run on this argument that in order for self-defense to be justified, to be moral, it has to be proportional. And then they would say something along the lines of, it is never proportional for a victim to kill their abuser because the victim is alive and the abuser is dead. So it's not equal, it's not proportional. How would this argument respond to it in two different ways? So I just want someone to tell me how this argument would respond to it in one way. How would this argument that we just read, that's very strategically built, respond to the claim that using deadly force in instances of repeated domestic violence is not proportional because the victim is alive and they are trying to kill the abuser, so they are trying to make the abuser dead? Carlos.
The first one argues that death is always imminent because domestic violence is a cycle that eventually results in death. And the second argues that the psychological damage that victims experience make it so that they might as well be dead because they find no purpose in life, almost no purpose.
Right, so what is the psychological state like? Someone said it over here. What is the psychological state like? Being dead. So there are two reasons why, if we care about proportionality, if we care about some kind of comparative understanding of how you can respond when someone's attacking you, it would be justified to use deadly force. The first is that it's justified to use deadly force because the cycle of abuse will always increase to the point where the abuser is going to kill their victim or is threatening to kill their victim. So then it is justified to use deadly force or to attempt to kill the perpetrator because that is equal. The second argument is that Ewing says that victims are in a psychological state where they are essentially dead. So, since they're in a psychological state when they're essentially dead, they can therefore kill their abuser. It's proportional.
So, we've seen how you can, when constructing a good argument, you must not only justify your original claim that responding to domestic violence with deliberate deadly force is an instance of self-defense, but the best arguments keep their opponent's arguments in mind. So you know people are running proportionality NCs. You saw all the hands. There's no reason that you should not include these types of arguments that are ready to answer a proportionality NC in your original case. They serve double duty, and the best arguments do. All right?
So, if you want to have a really strategic case, what should you do when you're thinking about writing your arguments? It's written on the board. Yes, Sam?
Think about common responses to your argument.
Think about common responses to your arguments and how your argument that you were writing originally can take it into account. Okay. Good?
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you for coming to Argument Internals.